This video is about solving linear equations in one variable, part 1. This section may be a little bit of review for you. Just as a refresher, we can add, subtract, multiply, and divide any equation by a number or an expression as long as we do the same thing to both sides. We cannot divide by 0 or multiply by 0. If we need to distribute, we should do that usually first. Then we isolate the variable on one side and go from there. So we're going to do some examples here. So we have 5 times x minus 2 plus 4 equals 16 minus 3x plus 3. So the first step here is to distribute through these parentheses, leaving 5x minus 10 plus 4 equals 16 minus 3x minus 9. So before I start moving things side to side, I'm just going to collect like terms. So minus 10 plus 4 is minus 6. And 16 minus 9 is 7. So I personally like to have my variables on the left-hand side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract 3x from each side. 2x minus 6 equals 7. We will then add 6 to each side. Again, as long as I do it to both sides, I should be good. And then I will divide both sides by 2. And we get 13 halves. Again, you can check this in your equation if you like. Just in the interest of time on the video, I'm not going to do that. Okay. What's different about this next one? Well, it has some fractions, so I'm going to show you something that I find extremely helpful. But first, I'm going to distribute through this negative 1/7. So I'm going to get 2/3 x minus 5 equals negative 1/7 x minus 2/7 minus 2/3. So all I've done at this point is just distribute through. But I notice that I have denominators here of 3 and 7. So my least common denominator in this particular case is 21. So I am actually going to multiply every single term by 21. And I'll show you what happens when we do that. In the first case, 3 goes into 21 7 times, and we get 14x. On the second term, there is nothing that's going to cancel. 5 times 21 gives me 105. 7 goes into 21 3 times, so we get minus 3x. Again, the 7 cancels, minus 6 and minus 14. So notice once I do that, I don't have any fractions. It's a lot easier for me to deal with. So I'm going to add 3x to each side so that I have my x's on the left, 17x. And then I am going to add the 105 to the other side. And I'm going to have 105 minus 6 minus 14, or 85. And I do believe 85 divided by 17 is a nice answer. We get x equals 5 as our final answer. So this idea of multiplying by the LCD to clear the fractions is very, very helpful, and you'll see me do it quite a bit. So I would practice doing something like that because it does make things a lot easier. Okay, rational equations. A rational equation is just a fractional equation, and the steps we're going to follow are number one, factor everything. We're going to find all of the excluded values. These are values that make the denominator equal to 0. We're not allowed to have 0 in the denominator, so we're going to have to say, oh, we can't have that number as an answer. We're going to find our least common denominator. Just like we just did, we're going to multiply the whole equation by the LCD. Once we do that, no denominators will be left, and then we'll solve the remaining equation. And then it's important here to check your solutions, specifically to make sure it's not one of your excluded values. So looking at this first example, all the denominators here are factored. We could factor our numerator. So let's do that because I think it's going to make our life a little bit nicer. So I'm going to factor that 2 out. 4, and as long as I have fractions, I'm going to go ahead and make that 4 over 1 and 13 over x. Look at 4x here. Now the reason I did that is I noticed when I looked at it that 2 and 4 can be reduced. So now we have x minus 1 over 2x plus 4 equals 13 over x. So what would our excluded values be? Well, anything that would make the denominator 0, which in this case is 0. The 2 values that would make, oops, I didn't mean to do that. The value that was going to make both of these 0 is going to be 0. So if we get 0 as an answer, we're going to have to toss it out. Now we need to find our least common denominator, which in this case is just 2x. And we know that if we multiply by 2x, all of those denominators will cancel out. So for this first one, everything cancels. We're left with x minus 1. For the second, nothing cancels, so we get 8x. And then for the third one, just the x cancels, and we get 26. So combining like terms, x and 8x is 9x. If I add 1 to each side, I get 27. And divide by 9, we get x equals 3. And then we check. It's not one of our excluded values, so this is a good answer. Let's do one more example here. This does have a typo, so we'll fix it right now. This actually should be not an x in the numerator, but a 2 in the numerator. So when we take a look at this, we follow the same steps, and the first thing we need to do is factor our denominator. So the first 2 denominators, there's nothing to be done, but for the third denominator, we need to factor. So we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to -3, and our only options here are 1 and -2, 1 and -3, or -1 and 3. So we want to get a +2, so we're going to use x minus 1 and x plus 3. The next thing we need to do is find our excluded values. Excluded values are values that would make the denominator 0. So either one of these factors, being 0, would say that either x cannot be 1, because that would make the denominator here and here 0, or x cannot be -3 because it would make the other factors 0. Okay, so once we've factored, and we found our excluded values, we want to multiply everything by the least common denominator. And our least common denominator in this case is x minus 1 times x plus 3. So we're going to multiply each one of these by x minus 1, x plus 3. And we know that when we do that, nice things are going to happen. So we notice for this first one, the x plus 3's cancel. And I'm left with 2 times x minus 1. On the next one, I notice the x minus 1's cancel. And I'm left with x plus 3. Really important here, especially because it's got the negative sign, that I put those parentheses there. It's always a good habit, and that way if it is a negative, you can see that that needs to be distributed. And then for this last one, the entire denominator and the entire LCD cancel, and we get 3x plus 1. So simplifying, we're going to distribute 2x minus 2, distributing the negative, minus x minus 3 equals 3x plus 1. Collecting like terms, 2x minus x is going to give you x. Minus 2 minus 3 is minus 5. And I'm going to subtract 3x from each side, minus 2x. And I will add 5, and I will get 6. So the final step is to divide by negative 2, and we get x equals negative 3. The last step is to make sure it's not one of our excluded values, but in this case it is, so we can't use that. So this equation has no solution. If you forget to check that, then you might answer a question like that incorrectly. I'm going to stop this video now and begin a new video right here where we say slope.